Thank you very much. Thanks for the intro. I'm Todd Weatherly, of course, and I probably need this to scroll through. You may see me take the glasses on and off because I refuse to go with bifocals. And one of the things I want to do with you today is, you've got access to these materials. I really want to talk to you about this a little bit because it's a lot to kind of process at once. And talking about what therapeutic consulting is and how we work with trust managers and trust officers it's a little complicated at times because we start getting into behavioral health terminology, which not everybody's familiar with. So hopefully by the end, you'll have a little bit of an idea about how to work with individuals who suffer from what's called SMI, severe and persistent mental illness, including substance use problems, substance use disorder, and all kinds of co-occurring conditions. So we're going to walk through this a little bit, and then we're going to talk about how Dorian and I work together. So there's our agenda. And one of the things that people really don't know much is, what in the heck is a therapeutic consultant? We get the question a lot, and most people don't know or understand it because they have no need to understand it. If you don't have a family member, if you never run into a situation where somebody is dealing with pretty significant and severe substance use or mental health conditions, you may not know about the kinds of professionals that run in the field or the kinds of professionals that support being able to find the right kind of care. So therapeutic consultants emerged out of what most people know of as ed consultants. It used to help people try and find their way to the right boarding school or the right college, and suddenly it became the right therapeutic boarding school and the right treatment, and then it applied to other people as the field grew and kinds of treatments grew in the nature of being able to serve not only adolescents and young adults, but also older adults. So that's me, and we already had a lovely introduction, and that's Dorian. And that is, what is a therapeutic consultant? But a therapeutic consultant is a professional that helps people navigate being able to get through crisis, identify the right treatment. More importantly, however, is also identify what does the process need to look like after that so it doesn't keep happening. How many people in the crowd have a client or have somebody that they've served that has a substance use problem or a mental health issue, and what they do is they keep going to the hospital? Yeah, got about, I'd say, 75% of the room holding up their hand. So a lot of times people think of being able to address a condition of that kind the same way you address breaking a leg or having a medical emergency. You go to the hospital, you get some treatment, you come out, follow up with the doc, it's fine, right? But if you walked into the hospital and what they identified was a severe heart condition, or maybe you had diabetes, or maybe you had some other prolonged and persistent or chronic condition that you were going to have to work with for the rest of your life. You're going to have to do something about it, change your lifestyle, see doctors, have support, go to groups, that kind of thing. Severe and persistent mental illness and substance use is no different than having a significant and severe medical condition. So in having that condition, if any of you I'm sure that we've got people in the room that either faced something like that themselves in terms of medical conditions, or they have a family member that's aged and suddenly they have this significant medical condition you have to navigate, and the first thing you go is, oh my God, where do I begin? You know, who's going to give me the right treatment? Do I like this doc? Where's the place where I follow up for specialty care? Is it even in my state? Those of you who live in rural areas, or you know people who do, there's nothing in your area and you have to travel for hours or sometimes out of state just to go find the care that you want. So for people who suffer from mental illness, the care is not as readily identifiable. And a therapeutic consultant, I travel the country. I visit anywhere from 50 to 70 programs a year, myself and my team. We evaluate programs, we determine treatment modalities, we talk to professionals in the field and find out what's current, what's cutting edge, what's working for people that need this kind of treatment, so that we can identify it for our clients and send them to the right place. So, just for a little review, why is this so hard and why is it so complex? Well, sometimes I like to say that people are not that complicated. The truth is that mental health treatment is pretty complicated, and it's not a user-friendly system. A lot of times if people are in crisis, what they need is help, and they need somebody to listen to them, and they need community. I think the solutions are actually, they sound quite simple. Navigating the process can be complex and difficult. So what I've done is I've just done a quick list of a series of disorders that that a person that you know, a family member you have, or a client you're working with may suffer from. Anxiety disorders, autism spectrum disorders, very popular topic these days. Dementia or other cognitive disorders. I'm certain you've seen that. Anybody know what body dysmorphic disorder is? Okay, so dissociative disorders, major depression and anxiety, and then if we get, a person can suffer from major depression to the extent that when they get so depressed, they actually have psychosis. They go into psychosis, and anybody know someone who's gone catatonic as a result of major depression? Yeah, very difficult to treat. So this is just a sample. If any of you have seen what's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, the DSM-5R now, of course, they've revised it again. There's been about, they do a 1 and then a 1R. Sometimes they'll do an additional revision. There's been about 15 versions since they created the book. So the book is almost as thick as this podium. Now it's a pretty big book, and it's written in very small letters, which I hate when I have to read it. But there are a lot of conditions out there. And then, of course, what you have is a lot of treatments. So we have a series of treatments that I've listed here. I won't go into all of them because it would take us all day. We could spend, for every condition you find listed in the DSM, you can find a book that's written about how to treat it, or several books depending on the condition. ADHD, for example, there are thousands of books written on how to treat ADHD. Then you get to treatments for different for different disorders, and some disorders can be treated with, if you're treating major depression, or you're treating schizophrenia, or you're treating anxiety, there may be a modality that fits them all. Actually, the modalities that typically fit schizophrenia and the modalities that fit major depression, they are different. They are very different. And if you try treating someone with schizophrenia with modalities that are actually designed for a person who suffers from anxiety and depression, though they may have those in their profile, you'll get nowhere because their primary condition, one that is a thought disorder, is getting in the way. So if you treat them improperly, you spend a lot of money and a lot of time getting nowhere. Medication management. And I'm sure everybody here knows someone, if you're not that someone yourself, that takes medication on a regular basis, and one of those medications is for emotional needs. Everybody knows someone for sure. 1 in 4 people in the United States suffer from a diagnosable mental health condition. So medication management, anybody know anyone who's gotten on and it really didn't work? Yeah, it way didn't work. Or got on a medication and they couldn't get off of it. It was addictive. So if you talk about substance use disorder, there's a broad profile. I saw a picture, the new face of opiate addiction, and it was a pair of retirees. Because people who have chronic injuries or have chronic pain, they start on opiates, and they end up developing a condition called neurodendritic hypersensitivity, which means that all pain is too much pain, and so they take their opiates for everything. So medication management becomes a huge deal. If you got somebody who suffers from anxiety and they're used to taking a benzodiazepine, anybody know what a benzo is? Okay, benzos they act like alcohol, ultimately, and they are addictive. And if you take benzos and you drink at the same time and then you suddenly stop, does anybody know what can happen? You can die. It'll kill you. It's like going into the DTs, but worse. Opiates are the same way. If a person's been on opiates, so I could just sit here and dive into this rabbit hole of how medications interact with mental health conditions, and we could spend the rest of our time talking about it, but we're not going to do that. So these are therapies, medication management, DBT. Does anybody know what the difference between DBT and CBT is? CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. It's actually a mode of CBT. But you use CBT on thought disorder and DBT on depression or borderline personality disorder. So I say all this to indicate how complex this stuff can get. Neurofeedback, EMDR, rapid resolution therapy, electroconvulsive shock therapy, ECT. Everybody's seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? ECT is a lot more sophisticated these days. They don't quite do it that way anymore. Very targeted. And for people who suffer from major depression, it can be a miracle. So mindfulness-based therapies, art therapy, there are all kinds of modalities. Now, I gave you a list of disorders. There was probably, 15 there. I gave you another list of treatment modalities. How many people feel like they would, how successful do you feel like you would be matching the modality up with the diagnosis? Be difficult without some experience. Some people are like, oh yeah, I could do it. That's cool, I like that. If you've had some experience with it, it's intriguing, but it is also complicated, and we only scratch the surface. So what is it that, tends to happen? Go to the hospital, they come out, they go back to the scene that they were in, and people who are suffering from a severe and persistent condition, whether it's substance use or mental health disorder, they're going to go out. We think that maybe a visit to the hospital is enough because we're used to that. Our mind thinks, oh, hospital, I'm better, and I come out, I follow up. That's the model of care that a lot of people have in their mind. You guys are probably more savvy than that because you've seen all kinds of clients with all kinds of conditions, and you know that it requires more. Others may think, because they have some experience, oh, well, we'll go away. I'll send my person away for 30 days to a residential treatment program, and that'll be enough. They'll come home and it'll be fine. For severe conditions, I'm afraid not. So levels of care and length of stay, I'm going to do these very quickly because we could spend a lot of time on these as well. Levels of care, if you start off at the top, you got hospital. Beyond that, you've got, say, clinic, stabilization clinic, med management clinic. Somebody's designed to assess what's going on, find the right medications, usually don't stay there for long-term treatment. After that, you've got residential care. Residential care, if we go, everybody here knows about what a hospital stay is. 72-hour holds, a lot of people probably familiar with that one. You'll see people stay in for a week, not more than 2. Occasionally that's broken, but that's roughly what you're dealing with. It's not enough. Residential care, people think 30 days. I'll tell you that a minimum amount of residential care is 6 weeks. It takes 45 days on average, according to the statistics, to actually help a person realize that they've had a problem, clear out from whatever they've been experiencing, stabilize, realize that they need to do something about this, and actually start working towards being better and living independently at some point. Most residential stays are anywhere from 60 to 90 days at minimum, that we see at least. After that, you've got PHP and IOP levels of care. Anybody know what those mean? PHP is partial hospitalization. IOP is intensive outpatient. However, PHP is often done in an outpatient format. You'll see PHPs all over the place. Most of them have housing, but they're separated. There's a thing we call the Florida model, and they did it because of insurance. The Florida model is you set up shop over here, you license it as a PHP, you house them over here and charge them very little, bill the heck out of insurance over here for the PHP, cut them a break on the housing. Florida model. It's actually pretty ingenious to get around the insurance game, which has dictated a lot of these levels of care kinds of features. But at any rate, PHP and IOP levels of care, those are step downs. PHP is 5 days a week, 3 to 6 hours worth of programming. IOP is 3 days. And then after that, you step down. PHP is anywhere from 6 weeks. IOP is about the same. And after that, if you're a person who suffers from a significant condition, you've had to pass through all these levels of care, how long should you stay in a supported living or transitional living environment? Take a guess. Anyone? Good. Thank you for that answer. Thank God. 6 months. 6 months to a year. When I see clients and they're facing crisis, I said, look, we're looking at a 2-year process. We're looking at a year of very significant levels of care. We're looking at another year of transitional living or being able to reintegrate into independent life. So, once again, we could spend a lot of time on this topic. These are just some of the features that supported living provides, but the thing is that if a person has run into trouble, they are going to need the support. You get back out in the world and all your triggers are there. Everything you did before, if you were a drinker or if you were a person who had anxiety and you ran into, all the triggers that made you afraid of being out in the world or caused you to isolate or caused you to have episodes of depression and anxiety, you're going to run into all those when you start living again, despite how well you've been in residential care and all these other levels of care. And now, your therapist isn't there anymore. There's a lot of the support and structure of clinical structure is not there anymore. And you're faced with free time and evenings alone. If you don't have some support feature wrapped up into that, and ideally even a groups kind of feature, a lot of people fail and they end up repeating the cycle again. So, I have Dorian up here, and she and I want to make this relevant to everybody here, of course, and she and I ran into each other in an unusual way. And I'm very glad we actually graduated from the same college. So, we were close to each other, we just didn't know it. But we had a client that was severe borderline personality disorder. I called her a pro. She was very manipulative, and what she had done with her trust was, she had spent $300,000 on I don't know what in a year. She had bought a business and it failed, and she had bought gear and equipment and lost the lease. I mean, there was all these things that she had done, and she was exhausting the family resources, and she was exhausting what was supposed to be, as you have all run into this, there were other siblings, and they didn't want all the family money just to go to her running through every dollar she could at any moment. So a trust was established, and there was a trust protector that was there. They had to move. They had to move trusts. Something happened, and they wanted to do that, and they found the Corporation of Guardianship. At which time, Dorian and I were introduced, and Dorian decided that. Based on the fact that I already had a relationship with the client, obviously, and that we were already working together and I already had a relationship with the family, we'd navigated a lot of difficult things at that point, that it was important for me to stay involved. So I stayed involved. Corporation of Guardianship took over management of the trust. She was not under guardianship, but they do that as well. And we spent the next year working together on managing this person's funds, which were dwindling. And this person would also, in addition to just buying things, would also try to pick every expensive mental health treatment that she could. Residential care, some specialized doc or something like that. And so what we proceeded to do was they would go through me and say, Todd, do you think this is actually worth it? Is this actually going to have any kind of impact on her, or should we just find a stabler situation? It's like, well, she's 63 years old. She's going to hit retirement. Benefits are going to come. We got to navigate the next 2 years with the existing funds of the trust as carefully as we possibly can. So I'm going to stay on top of it. I'm going to talk to her about her actual needs, and we're not going to spend $25,000, $30,000, $45,000 a month on residential care or therapeutic care that she does not need and will not benefit from. And so we spent quite some time until she moved to California managing that, and did in fact, pretty close to the mark, make it all the way to her retirement birthday with funds still in the trust. And then, of course, Medicaid and retirement funds came into play, and were able to pay for a lot of the things that she was seeking for care. But she still had funds in her trust by the time she hit 65, which is what we were aiming for. So I will let Dorian, and I doubt this crowd needs to hear it, tell everyone what a trust officer's role is, and maybe specifically in this context. Dorian, do you want the podium, or do you want to sit there?
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, As Todd said, I certainly don't have to tell you what a trust officer does, because I understand we have a lot of trust officers in the room. But in the context of therapeutic consulting and the clients that we're talking about, I've been in this role for about 10 years now, and one of the hallmarks, I think, of what we do as fiduciaries is we say no. A lot. And a lot of our clients maybe have never heard the word no before. And so we're the first ones that come and say, no, we're not going to be able to pay for a $40,000 a month treatment facility indefinitely. What's interesting about the client that Todd and I met working with, when we work with folks with severe and persistent mental illness, often the challenge is getting them to accept treatment, getting them to go to treatment. With this particular client, we couldn't get her to leave. She found this beautiful treatment facility in Asheville, North Carolina, the mountains, it's gorgeous, but it's about $40,000 a month, and she refused to leave. So it was sort of an unusual challenge that we were facing with this particular client, but the family, as Todd explained, they didn't know what to do. They couldn't manage this money for her anymore. They didn't know how to say no to her. Professional fiduciary was involved, and that's the first thing we said was, this money's going to be gone in a year's time if we continue going down this path. But we also understood that this was somebody, who clearly had mental health needs and did need treatment. But what did that look like? How could we put together a package of services that would still meet her needs, but then wouldn't also dwindle her trust down to nothing in a short period of time? And so that's where our relationship was born, is, help us navigate this system and put together a package of resources that are going to meet her needs and that financially she can afford. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, as a trust officer, that's what we're focused on, is preserving those funds to meet her needs not only now, but in the future.
We also had some leeches.
Oh, yes.
You guys know what I mean by leeches, right? Some people who were just hanging in there as care providers and charging a lot of money. And we had one of them send us a bill for like 15 grand. It's like, these are back hours. It's like, are you kidding me? Back hours? What are you talking about? We got to say no to that too. And no is, so I will, this next slide, of course, is what a therapeutic consultant does. I won't read to you because that's a pet peeve of mine. But, we're there to kind of be the receiving end of someone who might be, as a result of their condition, unreasonable, because we handle that all the time. So in this case, I was the filter. This individual would only contact me, not the trust. I already had bad relationship with the family, wouldn't talk to the trust protector, et cetera, would only talk to me. And we were able to navigate all these pieces. So, how does this relevant and how does this, have bearing on individuals who are trust protectors or attorneys and that sort of thing? I've kind of a little case review here that will allow us to talk about some of the more interesting ones that we've run into. One of these, this first individual was, so this is going to lay this out a little bit and make it make sense as to why it's challenging to deal with this. So this individual had called in a bomb threat to a school. His sister worked there, who he had a very tumultuous relationship. He was also not on his medications and having paranoia and psychosis and everything else. So as a result of doing that, he was picked up by the police. And he was being held, but they were in a position, and I don't exactly know how they were interpreting this. It's like, well, we're not exactly supposed to release him, but we can't really keep holding him either. So this was in one county, and the hospital with the capacity to serve an individual that had a psych unit was in another county. So Dorian calls me up. The thing I have to do is I call the police. I'm like, what's the situation? They give me the load, and I said, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to involuntarily commit this person in this county. You are going to take him and deliver him to the police there. They are going to take him into custody and deliver him to the hospital. Now, no one in the system thought to do this because they don't think outside of their boxes. So my job is to connect a lot of dots and think creatively. A lot of times it works. Sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of times it does. He got there. They admitted him into the hospital, and he was clearly found to be worthy of his involuntary commitment. That is, the psychiatrist upheld the commitment order that we filed at that time. And you guys here in Florida call it a Baker Act. So he goes into the hospital, and they start to give him medications. He starts to get a little clearer, but we know that he needs residential treatment. We know that he needs more than just a few days in the hospital to be able to get better. So there was a point in time when the hospital, now this individual was also under county guardianship. He had a DSS worker. Corporation of Guardianship has their own attorney on site. They've got Dorian as a trust officer, and they had some pull in the county that they're in because it's in the county they're located. So the hospital starts to threaten they're going to release him to the street, and they get their folks involved with like, the hell you are. And so he had to stay at the hospital until residential treatment was secured and a bed was found. We did that. He went away to residential treatment. After residential treatment, we secured transitional living for him. All the while, Dorian's managing the trust and funds. He's got a little money that's coming to him from retirement. And so he's able to get into transitional living. We give him a coach. We help him stay sober. We manage his meds. We make sure he's got a psychiatrist. We make sure that he's got the resources he needs to get around, learns the bus system and everything else. And this man is in his 50s, a retired vet. So when he was stable, he was pretty functional. Like he knew how to get around. And just this year, this individual, after a year and a half, he was able to successfully apply for and defend to get his independence back. He was no longer under guardianship. That's one of their favorite success cases. It was a long road, and those first bits were a little dicey, but that's where, everybody thinks dicey when you're talking about getting a person who's in crisis into treatment. For us, it's a Tuesday. That's our entire lives. That's where we live, and that's where most of our clients are. So, anything you'd like to share about that, Dorian?
We consider this particular client a great success story because he had been in and out of the system for a really long time. And I don't know the landscape in Florida. We're from North Carolina, and the mental health system does not function like a well-oiled machine in North Carolina. Is that the case in Florida as well? So, people bounce. They bounce from prison to short-term inpatient hospital stays. Maybe they'll go for a 6-month stay and stabilize just enough to be released, but with no plan of care, no plan of follow-up. And so they just bounce. And that's what happened to this gentleman. He had long-term paranoid schizophrenia, episodes of psychotic behaviors, and coupled that with the fact that he was a veteran, highly intelligent, and had the capability of following through on bomb threats and some of the things that he was threatening. So we were in a fiduciary role. We had his money. He didn't like that. He didn't like that we had his money. So our organization itself became a target. We ended up actually having to close our office for a couple of days when he was on the streets because we weren't sure what he was going to do. The police went to his apartment and found zip ties and bomb-making materials. So this was a scary situation. But again, it was sort of hot potato. Law enforcement acknowledge, well, this is somebody who clearly, needs mental health care. But the mental health system was saying, well, he called in a bomb threat, he should be in jail. And so it was this tug of war of what do we do with this individual? And so who do I call when I don't know what else to do? I call Todd, and I said, Todd, help us. We need help. He needs help. The client needs help. We're not doing any justice for this individual who truly needs help. And so it wasn't easy putting together the pieces of this puzzle, and we had to do a lot of advocacy and a lot of finagling of the system. But ultimately, with Todd's help, we were able to get him the treatment that he needed. And he's stable now for the first time in many, many years, and able to live independently, and ultimately got his rights restored, and is his own legal representative now, which is a really beautiful thing, and we're hopeful that he's going to stay on that path and can enjoy some quality of life, because otherwise I would be shocked if he was still alive or not in jail somewhere or harmed somebody else. So that's a story a case story that had a really beautiful ending.
Yeah, so we've talked about the individual there at client 2. I'll skip over to client 3 here. Not quite as much of a success story.
Not yet. We're working on it.
But so you've got somebody who's 70, and when you're 70 and you suffer from thought disorder of some kind with psychotic features, and you're regularly in psychosis and regularly delusional and regularly refuse to do meds, you are hard to track down. He's also a bit of a vagabond, so he might be on the coast or in another state or somewhere else. I mean, we're running after him all the time. So, this individual, we were able to involuntarily commit and get to residential treatment. And then we found him a housing situation that was not ideal, but it was one he was willing to do, and he blew out of it, because it didn't have the levels of care didn't have the supportive care that he really needed. So, at 70, he's also got some health issues and everything else, but when he's delusional, he likes to run and find his girlfriend and threaten her. And so recently what we've been doing is just running through arrest, jail, arrest, jail, arrest, jail, hospital, involuntary commitment, and hopefully this time we'll catch him and we'll be able to go from hospital to a supported living equation that will contain him, help him stay on his medications, and allow him to live out the rest of his life without what will end up being spending the rest of his time in jail. But he is tricky. He's intelligent. He's also charming, so he can talk a good game when he shows up in front of you. But in comparison to the other case where our first run went really well and we were able to lay out all the resources, this one's one that was tricky. But the thing is that he calls me, or he'll call the attorney, or he'll call someone else. He's not calling the trust officer. He's not calling the Corporation of Guardianship. He calls me. It's like, this is, he has a delusion that he's a general in the Army, and he'll say all kinds of things. And I'll let him, about the first 3 go to message, and then I'll eventually call him back and say, yeah, well, why don't you get back in front of the doc and let's make sure we get on the meds. Hey, I got a place for you to stay. And we go through it. But I become the barrier, the sieve, as it were, before he can access any of the trust funds or benefits. So the other one that we have is a little different, is one that came right after our introduction, but this individual doesn't suffer from psychosis. They've got certainly emotional issues. They're a person in recovery, but they haven't relapsed, but they have a large amount of trust funds that they have access to, but they are also, I won't call him aggressive, I'll call him volatile. He likes to be loud, he likes to threaten attorneys, he likes to threaten that he's going to sue you and everybody else. He'll call in and rake you over the coals, send long emails or text threads that are paragraphs long and just wear you out. So Dorian and crew had gotten tired of this one. And they handed him to me. But he's a guy who tends to do better with guys. And he's a person who tends to do better with people who are closer to his age. And we were able to just strike a good chord. After a little while, like, hey man, you have to calm that down. You know what I mean? I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, look, this is your trust is it's a tanker, not a speedboat. And it turns and moves at about that rate. So you're just going to have to be patient when you need something. We're going to work on this. We're going to get it done. And, it is one of those things that after a year and a half or better, I have enough of a relationship with him that the trust experience is none of that stuff anymore. Which, as you know, can kind of blow your office up. Dorian, do you have anything to say about that case?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's amazing the amount of time that you spend on these lengthy, epic emails, pages and pages and pages, and having to sift through, is there a disbursement request somewhere in there? In between all of these threats of, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to call the governor, I'm going to call the news station, you're stealing all my money, and it's like, what is he really asking for? So you spend so much time trying to sort through all of this to even find what it is that the person is asking for. And this is another example of a gentleman who never heard the word no. His trust is funded from very wealthy parents who just sort of, it was always easier just to say yes to whatever he wanted. And then the trust was funded, and the professionals then come in and are faced with, for the first time, having to say, well, no, it's not reasonable to buy a Lamborghini with your trust. Let's get a Honda instead. Let's create some boundaries so that we don't blow through this money. But that's really difficult to do with somebody who, it's difficult to do with anybody, really. I mean, nobody wants to be told how you can or can't spend your money, right? Any of us, we want to be able to have the autonomy to spend our money however we want to. But if you add that layer of a mental health disorder, it becomes a recipe for disaster. And so this case isn't quite as extreme as somebody who's dangerous or calling in bomb threats or anything like that. But, certainly somebody who we can't have a reasonable, logical conversation with. And so having Todd's group involved just serves as that buffer between us and the client, and allows us to do our job. We're able to approve or disapprove disbursement request, manage the funds appropriately, do all the things that are within our fiduciary obligations. And then Todd gets to handle the 50-page emails and the text at midnight that say, I'm going to call the governor. And so it's a beautiful relationship. It makes our job easier, allows us to do our job, and ultimately the client's happier because we don't have time to deal with all that. And Todd, like you said, that's Tuesday for him.
Exactly. The other thing that's a component of this for the court attorneys out there is that I'd say about 20, my colleague's in the back, she's going to laugh at this, about 25% of our folks are either in jail or being arrested. So, and ideally what I don't want them to do is either one, be released because they haven't gotten treatment, or two, end up in jail for a very long time, which some of them can end up there because of what they've done. So writing documents to courts or writing documents for attorneys that are in support of the person being deferred to treatment instead of to jail or further punitive action. That's one of the things that's a component of all this. And if you got, I'm sure people out there have individuals that are in their care or that you're working with that they get in trouble with the law a little bit when they're symptomatic. So the other thing is chasing after them when they're symptomatic. We have resources for finding people and getting them the treatment because we're not family. You'd be surprised how reasonable they get when it's a stranger who say like, hey man, why don't we just go do this and try it out? If they're talking to their sister, it's a blow up or it's whatever. They're talking to the parents, it's very difficult. So there are a lot of features to being able to manage this and being able to work in tandem with attorneys, courts, trust officers, trust protectors and the financial responsibilities, one of the things that we take very seriously is like, well, you know, the trust job is to protect the funds. So our job is to help them protect those funds and really name what is going to be useful, but also engage in a process as we did all the levels of care and treatment modalities and different conditions and everything else, really identify what kind of help do they need and how long do they need it. And get that as close to the mark as possible so that we can end up with a long-term sustainable outcome that doesn't drain funds or people's lives or trust officers' time on the phone and energy and everything else that a lot of this kind of condition will cost. We know how to sort through that stuff when it's mental health. So I did want to leave. We've got just a few minutes left. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I wanted to leave a few minutes to see if you wanted to ask anything, since this is a very different topic than you're typically used to. Please. All right.
Get ready. Do I need a microphone?
You can come up here if you want.
Hey, hang on.
We like to keep it casual around here, you know? I mean,
I'm going to speak a little bit, hopefully, about the dilemma. I'm a professional fiduciary. I serve as a trustee, power of attorney, guardian, et cetera. And I have had every one of these situations and more. The challenge I have, and probably many in this audience have, is when the trust document itself says if the trustee is aware or should be aware of any drug abuse or issues, that they are then not entitled to any distributions from the trust. So I find myself with my hands tied where I have addicts on the street refusing care, and I can't do anything because the trust document doesn't allow me to hire someone like you, because I'm sure you're not free, and so I can't.
fair.
There are drug interventionists, there are therapists, there's all kinds of things I'd like to do for these poor people who are on the street and who I've got this big trust with plenty of money, but I can't help them. What do you do in those situations? Am I right? That's a real problem.
Well, one of the things, in terms of documents that already exist, you have to run through the process, obviously, of getting a document changed with everyone if you want to invite different language. Now, the thing that, and there's an attorney up in the Massachusetts area that I've done some correspondence and collaborative work with. They're very good because they deal a lot with mental illness. And one of the things they do with the trust agreements is they write in a committee. And, you know, if this person becomes symptomatic, there's a subcommittee to the trust that involves therapeutic consultant, trust officer, maybe a family member, and they can, as a special group, approve of expenses designed to help this person if they are experiencing symptoms or they have relapsed and they're out on the street. And it gives you, and that way it's not one person deciding, so the weight doesn't lay on one person. But you've got a team, and you've got one of those people in there, a therapeutic consultant, who knows how to navigate getting that done as efficaciously and cost-effectively as possible. So that's one solution to that problem. The language already exists. You have to change it, but it could be an addendum, that kind of thing. I'm not an attorney. I'm sure somebody here can help them with that language. So.
Well, I think that's a great idea. And for the planners out there, I think giving the trustee the discretion rather than these, you know, difficult behavioral modification provisions that cut off benefits for things, but to give the trustee the discretion to do exactly that, to form a committee to help with these behavioral addiction issues. And I appreciated your concern about having to close an office for a couple of days. I mean, when you're serving as a trustee and you're saying no to people who have unstable personalities, it can get a little scary.
A little scary, yeah.
But thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to take the stand?
Anyone else want to join us?
Any other questions? Got just a couple more minutes. And we've got a roving mic as well.
Oh, I see.
Or if you've
There's
got a strong voice.
A hand in the back.
We serve all over the country. We work a lot in Florida. You may not know this, but Florida is referred to as the relapse capital of the world. You also have a lot of treatment here, and I have a lot of clients that come from Florida. So, so we come here quite a bit and we tour programs. But part of what our job is to do, and it's very difficult for anyone else. It's a weird job, I admit it, and finding your way here is a long and winding road. But a therapeutic consultant is basically designed to have to be out in the world and see all the programs and find resources. I mean, I have transport people across the country. If you're in California and you need to get to Idaho, I got a guy who lives in between and can do both of those. Or I got somebody on the East Coast, somebody on the West Coast, and somebody in between. I've got an interventionist, I've got a transport person, I've got a therapist, a doc, a program, and maybe the treatment you need is not in Florida, or you shouldn't receive it in Florida because what you're going to do is walk out. So we're going to put you in a program that's got some very interesting location parameters, which means you're in the middle of the desert and you're not going anywhere. You're welcome to walk out into the middle of the desert if you want to, but knock yourself out. You're going to return when dinner comes, I promise you. So at any rate, what's the treatment that they need, and is it in the state? And can we get, most of the people that have gone for treatment in these cases, they went for treatment outside of the state of North Carolina. A couple of them to Florida.
We send a lot of North Carolina folks down this way.
And then came back to establish the other pieces of the agreement. But that was where the treatment that they needed was going to be most effective. And so that's what we did. So we roam the country and we figure out what the resources are and how to put them into place and what professionals you're going to need and play in your team. So we work all over the country. I work with trust entities that are up and down the board. We've got one we work with in California. That one's a difficult one. So at any rate, any other questions?
Suppose you have a recalcitrant beneficiary, refuses to go to the institution. What can you do to force them to go?
Depends on the situation. It's a good question, and that's, again, a Tuesday for us. Most of our clients don't want to go. Usually it's a series of restricting resources, so they don't have access to things that are causing them to be comfortable in their current situation. Other times it's having to involuntarily commit them, as we did with many of these. And when they are committed, they get just enough medication in them that we can get them compliant enough that the person who meets them at the door is the transport person that's taken them to residential care. Now, I'm going to share this story, and at some risk. I got 20 seconds. But one of these individuals that we had to get to Florida, here's the thing, is he fancies himself a bit of a ladies' man. Now, there's a transport person down on the coast that does a lot of good transports. She's an excellent professional. She's a very attractive young woman. So I sent her to pick him up in the hospital. He had no trouble getting in the car with her.
Just do whatever works, right?
And successfully made it down to where we needed him to go, where our doctor was waiting for him, and readmitted him to the hospital. So we've got tricks that we can use. I won't tell you all of them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.